Hey there, BookTube. You probably couldn't tell by the books I usually review on this channel, but I am a big fan of fantasy. And in fact, until college, most of what I read was fantasy. But tell me if you've ever heard this plot before. An unlikely hero of unknown parentage has to go on a journey with dwarves and elves to save a kingdom and defeat a dark lord. What I just described there are the most generic elements of any fantasy that could be conceived by someone who reads the genre. And it's kind of why I don't read as much fantasy as I used to. I read the classics when I was younger, like Lord of the Rings or Chronicles of Narnia, and I've read some of the good new ones such as A Game of Thrones or Harry Potter. These are all great fantasies, but why do these ones work while a bunch of other newer ones don't? I have a problem getting into newer fantasies, largely because of the description I just gave that you'll find for many different generic fantasy plots. The problems I have with YA fantasy I'll discuss in another video, but suffice it to say that they have a lot of the same lacks of originality. Well, of course they lack originality. I don't know how many of you out there have tried being a fiction writer, but it is really damn hard to come up with a new idea that no one has ever heard of before. When I read a book, I'm not expecting every single idea I come across to be original, but I do expect the author to try and put some new spin on it that I haven't seen before. And when most new authors try to do this, they fail because they make bad changes or changes that don't make anything substantially different. None of us as readers should really be harping on authors for not having truly original ideas because there really aren't any. The 4 series I mentioned earlier are not actually original, but the difference between those and newer works of fantasy are the inspirations for those works. J.R.R. Tolkien was inspired by Norse mythology and Catholicism. C.S. Lewis was inspired by Mediterranean mythologies and the Bible. And most modern fantasy writers were inspired by one of them or one of the writers who had been inspired of them. So really all modern fantasies are derivatives of derivatives. But not all modern authors are like this. George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series is inspired by medieval European history. And in case you didn't notice, J.K. Rowling's Voldemort is basically just Wizard Hitler. So the problem modern authors are having is the source of their inspiration, not necessarily a lack of originality. I mean, none of Tolkien's ideas are original. Most of the dwarvish names from Tolkien's books all come from the Kalevala, and C.S. Lewis uses creatures from Greco-Roman mythology mixed with biblical allegory. Neither of them had any original ideas, but they got as close to the original source material as they could for inspiration. So my suggestion to you young budding fantasy writers is not to take your inspiration from past fantasy writers, but rather go to the source of what has inspired fantasy for all of human history. If you want to know my feelings on a particular set of fantasy works, then go ahead and click here for a playlist of my reviews of the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, still in progress. Also, a couple months ago, I started a podcast, and so if you want more about that, you can check the description for info, or you can click this annotation here or check the cards for a link to the YouTube version of this podcast. Thanks for watching and keep reading.